welcome to Beyond the Message, the podcast where we take the weekly teaching at Christ Community Chapel and we bring it into the rest of your week. Each week, we sit down with friends and ministry leaders from CCC to laugh a little bit, to reflect, and to figure out how to live out what we are learning. If you didn't see the sermon or get to hear it yet, no problem. In the description for this episode, you can find a link to that or check it out on the CCC app. I'm Stacy DiNardo, and I'm joined here by my co-hosts Jimmy, Sarah, and Jamie. They're going to introduce themselves in just a minute, but I'm going to give them a random question to answer as well as their introduction. So that random question, if you had to live off of one food for the rest of your life, what food would that be? And let's get to know you a little bit. Okay, Jimmy.
Well, I'm Jimmy. I'm the director of operations here at CCC. My food is eggs. I feel like
you just said that so bluntly. My food is eggs.
Well, it is. They are versatile. You can prepare them multiple. If I have to eat one thing for the rest of my life, then I want something that I can change.
Now, are you saying eggs too because you could like put something with it, like?
Not allowed.
I feel like that would
I'm
be
asking,
not in the spirit of the question.
Okay, so just eggs, but prepared
I wouldn't
differently.
choose something like pizza because it's so changeable.
Okay, eggs it is.
Okay, I'm Sarah. I'm the Kids and Students Director. I don't really like this question, but the first thing that came to mind was bananas.
I can see why you don't like this question.
I just feel, maybe I could, I mean, in light of what you were saying, maybe I could like fry them. Or mash them.
One does.
Are you a baby?
I don't know.
Are you a little baby that you eat mashed bananas?
I don't like this question. Jamie?
Do you like bananas that much, though?
I really do like
many
bananas.
bananas
And I
do
do
you eat?
Then
think,
it's good
I think
answer,
they're a
good
great
answer.
fruit. They have
Yeah.
a lot of potassium. They're a good recovery fruit because I'll
That's
be
true.
working out a lot with just me and my bananas.
Superior
Okay,
potassium.
we'll move on to
Yes,
Jamie.
please.
Appreciate that answer,
Okay,
Sarah.
thanks.
I guess I am the sort of man who would choose pizza. I don't know what that says about me, but I feel super versatile. Now, I've heard this question before. I think a lot of people will try to choose pizza, and they're like, because I can do all these different sorts of pizzas. Yeah. I will honor the integrity of the question, and I will commit to
Way to go.
pepperoni pizza. I
Hot
feel
honey
like
or no?
I would always hot honey.
Of course, hot
Donato's.
honey. Yes.
That
Hot honey
is-
pepperoni is my favorite pizza.
Donato's?
Yep, it's the best. And I think you can eat it cold, you can eat it hot, take it on the go. It's very versatile.
Very practical.
Stacy seems to have a problem with Donato's.
I just didn't think that would be someone's favorite.
I think Donato's
But
is by
I don't
far-
wanna-
You're in
I
Ohio?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I've already introduced myself, but let me just share my food since I feel like, I should do that. I would do peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And again, most people that do know me pretty well know that food is like functional. So I feel like it's a very functional, it'll fill me up, give me sustenance. It
kind
has
of
some
bread?
different food groups. I do a nice
Like a wheat bread
wheat bread,
with some seeds in it.
probably some seeds in it,
Crunchy.
Oats, perhaps?
and some
Smooth or crunchy peanut butter.
oof.
That's
then
I feel
what-
like that's a whole
My
different
follow-up-
conversation.
My follow-up is what flavor of jelly?
Okay, so I was picturing smooth, so I'll just have to stick with that. Smooth peanut butter, and then I would do strawberry jelly.
Yeah. Okay. That was the right answer.
Well, that's great. Well, promises made, promises kept. We're going to jump in to talk about week 1 of that series to remind us and to remind any listeners about kind of what the teaching was, to recap that. Pastor Joe spoke, and it was out of Genesis 11 and Genesis 12, and it was the call of Abram, the promise made to Abraham. It started, though, with the rebellion, and that is the story of the Tower of Babel, where we see humankind basically believing that they will flourish most when they are in control of everything. And then God, of course, kind of said, no, this is not how you are going to flourish. You're going to flourish when you trust me. And he broke up, and sent everybody, then gave them different languages to speak. But then we move into the call of Abraham, that again, where we really learned and saw that God is the one that initiates. We do have to hear, we have to respond, and then surrender is connected to that. And then ultimately the hope, because of the promise that we have, that God makes and extends to each and every one of us. So loved it. It was a great teaching. I think there's a lot in there that we can talk about. And to start off, just really want to ask each one of us to share just one takeaway at a pretty high level of just that stood out to you from the teaching. So who wants to start?
I'll go.
Okay.
I thought, Joe talked in the beginning of the message about the law of entropy. And I think, from my perspective, one of the things that stuck out was to connect the law of entropy to God's calling in my life. And, one of the things that I've noticed about myself is that when I am not pursuing God in the day-to-day habits, whether it's spending time with Jesus regularly, praying regularly, that kind of thing, I can begin to see the effects of the law of entropy taking place in my life, whether it's in my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids, the way I approach my work, my day-to-day. You can kind of see it happen. But part of what it means to step into what God is calling you to is to be aware of the effect of the law of entropy and to actively fight against entropy taking place spiritually.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I think it's very similar. Pastor Joe referenced a movie at the very beginning, a Tom Cruise movie, and it was this idea of like, hey, you're either with me or without me. Like, you're going to be safer with me than you are without me. And I just immediately thought, like, with God or without God?
Yeah.
Like, where is my life better? And it's always with God, obviously. But I think that was just something that he continued to talk about and how we can do that well.
Yeah, I feel like my takeaway kind of connects in and jumps off of that decently well. I felt like a lot of the sermon was setting the stage for the reality that we have a choice. Like there's a choice to be made. The world is broken because of what we have done. God has initiated this call, and then you and I have a choice. How do we respond to that? Do we choose to say yes to that, to respond to that, and say, we want this life with God or not? And I think that that's the choice for Abraham, and that's the choice for all of us in many ways in the many day-to-days of our lives.
Yeah, no, those are all great. Again, even somewhat along the same lines, I just was really impacted in remembering and realizing how amazing it is that God is the one that is always pursuing us. God is the one that initiates things, and he is the one that qualifies us. And I wanted to just take a second and watch actually a segment of Pastor Joe talking about that I thought was really meaningful.
And if you're here, then you are here and interested in God only because he is calling you. He initiates that, and it's not because of you, it's because of him. The call of God is much more like when I was a kid, when we went out for recess, we went out to the playground, and we wanted to play football or kickball or anything. The two best athletes were always captains, and then they took turns picking the next best person that was available, and there were always a couple of kids that never got picked. They just weren't good enough. The call of God is like God being one of those captains and picking a kid that would never get picked because he's saying, I'll carry this team. I don't need you. I want you. That's God's call. God initiates the call. It's all grace when God initiates the call to you. He has just said, I want you. I want you.
I love that. I mean, just the fact that, again, for each one of us, that God has pursued us, God has called us. It's up to us to hear, to respond, and take action in that, but how humbling it is and how amazing it is. I don't know if you had other thoughts on that or if that segment hit you, but I know I
really resonated with that because I feel like I was usually one of the kids that got picked last.
Oh, okay.
A little bit.
Different way to, yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think it was almost a reminder of God doesn't need me to be part, but he chooses to use me. Yeah. And I don't need to bring anything to the table for that to happen. And that is one of the coolest things
I think
about what God does in our life. Yeah.
It's cool to think about, that idea that, both in the sense of becoming one of God's children. So actually salvation, God calls and initiates, but then also that he allows us to participate in work that he doesn't need us to do. And that's pretty amazing to think about.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I have another question as we just continue talking about things. Want to hopefully encourage us even to be a little bit vulnerable. Another thing that really stood out to me from Pastor Joe was he talked about that continuum and the reality that with God and without God continuum, but that the more I surrender, the more God will make the best version of me, and ultimately the world will be better for it. And so just wanted to ask each one of us to say, hey, where, practically speaking, are there areas of our life that we still can see, man, I need to surrender that to God and surrender more of that and trust him with it?
Everybody looked at me.
You will.
Jamie?
Not to put you on the spot,
to read
Jamie.
into that,
No, I mean, I had a moment this past week that as I was hearing the sermon kind of came back to me. And I mean, if we're willing to be real. So I was working on my car, had a big project, and I was choosing to do the work on my car in order to save a chunk of money versus bringing it into the shop, and had a home project that I'm doing myself again for some of the same reason. Neither one of those two projects was going anywhere near the way that I had hoped. I needed to order more parts. My car ended up on blocks for a couple of days. Things were just not playing out. And there was a moment in my frustration this past week where I said the phrase in my driveway. I was like, I'm tired of being poor, which is, I will, I'm a little bit ashamed that was my thought. But in honesty, I'm like, two things were revealed. One, I am wildly unaware of how blessed I am in so many ways. And then the second thing, as I reflected back on it, was I am finding my hope in my comfort and my ease, that, I'm expecting things to be better and be easier. And for me, money is the thing that I saw in that moment was going to lead to that. And so, I just was thinking that is, a moment where I had missed it. I was chasing after something else. And
No.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, yeah.
I know for me, I see it, I feel like it gets in front of my face almost every day in parenting with your kids. I think there's so many things that we want to try to control with our kids, and it's really hard to surrender fully your kids to the Lord because you might not think that that's what's best for them. God knows what's best for them. And I think I have an older son who's going through a process of trying to find a job, and I find myself even trying to control the situation, or like, have you talked to this person? And I'm going, Sarah, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why are you trying to control a situation that God is sovereign? He's got this. He's got Noah in his hands. You need to release that because it's not even helping him learn what it looks like to trust the Lord.
Well, and everything that we believe we actually are in control of, we're not. And no, I mean, and I'm saying that because I'm reminding myself, because I'm going, control spans so much. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything to share, Jimmy?
I mean, I think
not forcing you to.
No, well, it seems like you are. So, I think for me, it's more like this would hit me this week just in my work. I think I like to be responsible for my own outcome. And so that leads to a tendency in me to feel like I need to control the process from end to end in whatever project that I'm working on. So I'm not good at letting other people step in and be involved. And so I can be a little bit of an isolationist in that regard. And I think, on the surface that is, can be problematic at work, but also just it speaks to a lack of surrender in the sense that I am attaching my worth and identity as a person to the outcome and success of a project or something that's happening at work. And that's obviously anti-gospel.
Yeah. Yeah.
It comes back to Babel and like they sought to make their name great.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the tensions that came up in the sermon. And so whatever it is that we think will make our name great, that we're chasing after in our life, that we're putting our trust and our hope into, other than God, like that's keeping us from surrendering to him.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I need to share something since I put you guys on the spot. I made like a list, started going through it, but I feel like routine, my comfort. I was really convicted even this week of how critical I am, and that's just really probably connected to my pride. And then even Jamie, similar to you, I realized there's so much with finances that I don't surrender to God. I mean, goodness, I know we are very, very fortunate. I think most of us in Northeast Ohio, are fortunate to have what we have even, and just to be able to go like, man, it is all God's, and I really need to make sure I'm entrusting him and using it how he wants me to use it. So
and we chase after it because it gives us a semblance of control.
That's right. And they're all connected, right?
Yeah.
They're all connected. No, that's good. If anyone wants to jump in and share just other ways that they feel like the message has hit them, they want to apply it.
One thing that I was thinking about a lot this morning was just maybe something that I would encourage us to consider as we go through this whole series, looking at Abram, soon to be Abraham's life, is that, I think sometimes when we look at characters in the Bible, we have a tendency to want to categorize them as like good guy, bad guy, hero, villain. And I think, for example, with Abraham, we have the benefit of posterity. We know how the whole story goes. And so sometimes we'll be in the thick of a story with Abraham and we'll be like, man, why are you acting this way? And what I would challenge us to do is to, rather than taking an outside perspective on Abraham, to try to identify with Abraham, because I think the writer of Scripture, in this case, I think that's going to be the most helpful for us when it comes to how we actually grow and learn in our relationship with God, is to put ourselves. This also occurred to me. Jamie and I are preaching next week on another story that's going to have some similar themes to the one from this week. But one of the things that I've been struck by again and again and again is that it's easy to, in posterity, look back at Abraham and say, I can't believe you acted the way that you acted, because I want to categorize him as hero to aspire to, or, foolish person to avoid acting like. But in reality, he is just inherently human, as am I, interacting with God. And so my focus should be on that rather than should I try to emulate Abraham's behavior or not.
Yeah, that's really good.
And I think as we identify in with him, we see what Pastor Joe talked about. Like, he had done nothing to deserve being called by God, and yet he was. And I think all of us, hopefully in the gospel, can identify with the reality that we did nothing to deserve Jesus' offer and gift to us of life.
And that's like, even with Abraham's story, to think about, like, this is a guy who, like Joe said last night, he worships the moon.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
Idol worship. Right?
So I envision.
Yeah, I learned that.
But I envision him, he's sitting around a fire worshiping a moon, and then all of a sudden, God shows up and just says, start walking.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, on one hand, again, we have the benefit of looking back and be like, this is God speaking to him. We see how the story is going to end. We see Jesus. We see all these things happening. Abraham doesn't know that. He just knows, I heard a voice tell me to start walking. And he starts walking. Yeah. Like, that's
obedience.
Pretty powerful.
That's response. It's pretty amazing. No, that's really good. That's a good perspective, as to your point, just as we think about things week to week. And can't wait to talk about your sermon next week, Jimmy and Jamie. Look at that. No, I was struck too, Jimmy, you mentioned the law of entropy, and just that, and just to remind everybody what that is. It's basically a scientific law in physics, I believe, where that if you don't do anything, the default is that there will be deterioration, there will be a breakdown, and the application of saying, spiritually speaking, emotionally speaking, and relationally, like, that same law seems to apply. And so I just kind of wanted to ask the question, like, on the other side of that, as Christians, when we are with God and when we are pursuing that fully, what are things that we see that God does in our marriages, in our lives, in our workplace, because we are with God versus allowing that deterioration and that default to happen? I don't know if anybody's got anything on that.
I mean, I know for me, times in my life where I think often in pain, in hard things, we feel like we really don't have any other choice but to surrender, right? Yeah. Because I think about, like, my younger sister a couple years ago was diagnosed with cancer, and it was a pretty aggressive form of cancer. And she was someone who lived a life of, like, she was really healthy, she exercised, she did all the right things. And I think you're forced into, well, there's nothing I can do in this moment. And when you're able to surrender in a way, maybe out of even desperation, I think that
in some situations you don't have a choice.
Well, right. And that's what that was, right? But there was an intimacy that came with that where you're seeing God move in ways that you wouldn't have even anticipated, whether that was through a relationship with a doctor or a nurse, or even, with her kids or in our family. I don't think it always has to happen that way. I don't think it has to be on times of pain or hurt or, cancer. But I think it is a good reminder of when we're able to fully lay things down at the feet of Jesus, the way that he meets us in that, and how he can lead us in it, because God always wants the best for us. He wants us to flourish, but that doesn't always look the way we want it to look. And I think that Abram's story is a great example of that. So that's just something that really stood out to me.
Yeah, I think with entropy, if entropy is moving from order to disorder, the opposite of that, I think, could be described as almost blessing, which is the word that's used over and over again in this passage. So blessing is flourishing, things being able to be fully what they were.
Yeah.
And so fruitfulness, multiplication, all of those things are wrapped up into it. for me, a place in my life where I feel like I've experienced both of those, and the contrast between them most clearly is relationships. I think of relationships that I've had and that I can remember before I knew Jesus, and what happened in the midst of them because they were centered on me. As I was trying to control and get the most out of those. They did not flourish, surprise, surprise, when they were centered on that. But as I began to follow Jesus and began to trust him and his design, and I was thinking about other people, I think that my relationships with others had the opportunity to flourish.
That's really good.
So,
yeah. We're going to wrap things up in just a minute, but to close out, want to take a minute to just think about a challenge that we would want to give to anyone listening out of this week's sermon in a way that they can live it out this week. I'll go ahead and start. It really I was thinking a lot about when Pastor Joe was talking about how people need to personally respond to the call that God is extending to them as he is initiating with them, and how he mentioned that there are a lot of folks, and I've encountered this as well, that just are coming to church or are from a Christian family and kind of connect that they're a Christian because they come to church and their church attendance or being a part of a Christian family. And I just want to challenge that if that's you and you were able to acknowledge and go like, ooh, yeah, that's me, to take the step and to answer the call and to trust God and put him on the throne in your life. So that's my challenge.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things Joe said in the sermon that was really interesting to me was he talked about at one point how God has already spoken in his word. And, so if you're looking to find what God has said, you can look there. And I think that's the challenge that I would offer. I think for me, at least, I've at times had the thought of like, man, life would be so much simpler if God would just speak audibly like he does to Abraham in my own life. Sure. That would make things a lot less complicated. But the reality is through his word, he has spoken finally and fully, and everything we need to relate with him. And he said he's given us all things for life and godliness, and that's in his word. And so I would just I would challenge the listener to spend time. If you want to hear from God, spend time in his word.
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest challenge, even in my own life, is to identify that area that I haven't fully surrendered to the Lord, or I keep trying to kind of take back. And so I think that can be in our parenting, in our marriage, maybe even in our finances. So I think one of those things is to identify it and then just...
Yeah. Can I just push on that? I think one of the things was curious about when you say like surrender, I think if I'm listening to this, I can think, okay, in an abstract sense, to surrender to God, that makes sense. But like, for example, with finances, if you said surrender your finances to God,
right?
What could I do?
What
does that actually look like today?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think I've heard it's been said that if you look at your checkbook, which I don't even know if anyone uses a checkbook anymore. I did back in the day.
It's right in your purse under the bag of Werther's Originals.
Right. Right. But if you look at where you're spending your money, you often can see what you value most, like what you treasure. And so I think it could be...
about that.
Yeah, I think there is. I think it'd be pretty obvious where you are spending time and resources. And so maybe just reevaluate that and say, can I be more generous?
Or maybe even step one is just to look. Just to peel back the curtain and say, okay, what actually am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that would be my challenge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie?
I think my challenge, maybe even tying some of those together, is I think identifying the area. I think what Jimmy said is looking to see what God has said about it. But I was thinking about the call to Abram begins with God saying, leave where you are. Pastor Joe talked about how we should expect that when God calls us, it should change us.
Yeah.
And so I think you should expect to have to change something. So even as you identify and then you look at what God says in his word about that aspect of your life, we should say what needs to and should change in my life in order to trust God more and trust myself less.
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you guys for joining me. And thanks so much for tuning in to Beyond the Message. Take a minute when this is done to just subscribe so that you don't miss out next week on an episode. And if you haven't, check out our CCC app, YouTube channel, website for more resources to support you or anyone listening throughout the week. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.